is over on the Meadowy. And I guess I probably can't do that. Okay. And the reason I threw this slide in because it has a lot of features of, areas where we may want to target restoration work. This is the headwaters of the Meadowy coming off the Green Mountain National Forest. So it was a good project to get really access to really good habitat upstream in a protected area. And this particular site, we were able to do this restoration with a combination of federal grants, and a big portion of that came from the U.S. Forest Service. There's something called the Wyden Amendment, which allows us to work off the national forest on private or town public lands and use that funding to do restoration if the impacts at that location have headwaters on the forest. So it's a great source of funding for us to go after to do this type of work. There's probably 6 or 7 landowners on the other side of this culvert that never would be able to, I mean, they probably could. I don't know the wealth of the community on the other side, but these are expensive projects, and it's not, somebody's got something ringing in the background, and it's not a town road, so the town wouldn't be involved with this. So we ended up replacing this. I want to say the final price tag was about $300,000. And you see the structure we replaced it with. This was actually a steel stringer bridge with a precast concrete slab deck. And great project, opened up. I want to say we were close to 10 miles of habitat upstream of this location. That's the type of projects we look for, and I'll share a little bit more about that in a few minutes. All right, next, Michael. Here's kind of an overview of how these structures become perched in the first place. You have you can kind of see, I can't point to it, I don't think. Can you see my cursor?
No, but I can. What do you want us to show?
Just circle the hourglass up at the top there. Michael, yep. The hourglass diagram, yeah. So you have, high flows coming into these structures being compressed to go through the pipe, and then on the the downstream end, you have a lot of energy coming out of that pipe. It's like a fire hose, you're shooting high pressure water out of there, and just over time, it erodes the bottom of the stream bed there. And as you can see in that picture, that wasn't put in, what is that, 3 feet above the stream bed? It was put in flush with the stream bed, and over time, it just erodes that away. And that erosion is really detrimental to the entire stream channel moving down, from basically moving phosphates down the system, because a lot of that sediment and sands in the system from roads have phosphate attached to them. So that's a big impact. And then also the bank erosion and mobile sediments that move down through the system into the lower gradient reaches is a big problem as well. All right, Michael. So it kind of begs the question, why are so many of these? And I'll share this a little later, but up to 50% of these structures are failing, what we consider failing. And why do we have so many of those? And you can see in this quick narrative that a lot of this work putting in these structures, prior to the 70s was, how cheaply can we get away with putting in a culvert into these systems? And it was all driven by expense. And, if there was any design work done, they often design these structures to the flows that you would see at a 25-year storm event, as opposed to what we're doing today, which is designing for the 100-year storm event. And at the same time, they were also using 50-year-old rainfall data from NRCS, which is significantly higher now than it was in the past, basically driven by climate change. All right, next. So here's a couple good schematics. We worked with New Hampshire on the design on the left. And that was the original. We built a model that would allow us to collect field data that Joel will talk about in a bit. Collect field data, put it into a hydraulic model, and come up with a vulnerability analysis of when a structure would fail. And as you can see from that schematic, there's passable, transitional, or vulnerable, and then failed on the left-hand one. And you can see where that failed line is. Basically, my feeling, and many that work with me, was if the water is overtopping the pipe, that's as good as failed. And it doesn't mean that pipe is going to blow out during that storm event. It just means that it's not able to do the job that it was designed to do. More recently, probably in the last 3 years, we did an update with the state of New Hampshire, and you can see on that side that dramatically changed from passable to the top of the pipe, transitional from the top of the pipe to the top of the road, and then failed means that it goes over the top of the road, which is that red portion of that photograph on the right. And I mean, I think if you thought about it long enough, you would realize that, in my opinion, that structures failed at the top of the pipe, not at the top of the road. And mainly because the amount of fill in between that top of the pipe and the top of the road is acting as a dam. And if water gets to the top of the road, in this particular case, that's a lot of backed up water in that system and very, very vulnerable. So I argued against using this new model in a room of about 20 people. I think I had some supporters, but the state ended up deciding to use this as the new model, mainly because they felt the public understands failed structures when water is going over the top of the road. So anyway, I did my battle on this and I lost. Go ahead, Michael. So this is what a good pipe looks like. And I'm happy to share this PowerPoint with you guys if you wanted to review this in more detail. Michael has it. But this structure, as you can see, it's got an open bottom. It definitely is big enough to handle the flows. I won't spend time going through each of the bullets on the side there, but it's a good looking structure. And fish, my priority is getting fish upstream so they can spawn. And when you have this type of natural substrate moving through that structure, that's how fish are going to be able to move upstream. So that's my whole goal. All right, next. And I just threw this in so you guys can see the transition. On the right side, you can see a natural channel will end up going through an evolution where eventually it downcuts. The stream bank walls will eventually collapse in. And then if left to its own devices, it'll form its own floodplain again. And so when we're looking at putting in a new structure, we use this landform as a means to identify what size structure we put in. There's something called bankful width. And the bankful width, if you look on the right side of that photo where there's the floodplain, the top of that edge of the stream channel where water would begin to spill out of the stream as the volume increases, that's basically the bankful width. So we would measure from the right bank to the left bank at that elevation. And you guys will, if you're not already familiar with it, you'll become very familiar with it in watershed projects because everybody uses that bankful. And technically a bankful height is formed because of the 1.7 year flow events. And we normally just say it's a 2-year storm event. And that level of water moving through the system happens normally once a year, at least with spring thaw. That's about the height of what we're looking at. All right, Michael. This is a project we did on the Meadowy as well. And again, just showing you the vulnerability and the power of these systems and how far undersized they are. The outlet photo at the top there is showing, what is that, even probably by the time it hits the stream bed, 4-foot perch. You have all that depositional substrate on the inlet side, shrinking that inlet volume and creating more power coming through the outlet, continuing to erode that site out. So when we go in and do the engineering work to set this up, we take into account the 100-year storm event. And when we build these or when we model these, we look for what's called 1 foot of freeboard from the top of or the low chord of the bridge for the 100-year storm event. So wherever we expect that 100-year flow to be, we need 1 foot of freeboard to the low chord of the bridge. And in this case, I don't remember what the exact size of this structure was, but you can see to handle that flow coming off the Green Mountain National Forest, that's a big structure when it was probably, that looks like a 6-foot structure that was in there previously. Go ahead, Mike. This was a project we did on the Ammonoosuc River in New Hampshire. It drains into one of the major tributaries draining into the upper Connecticut River, and it basically drains the west side of the White Mountain National Forest. We did this project back in 2016, 753 culverts were assessed. Go ahead, Michael. And here's some of the data that came out of that, you know, the type of structures that we have. Mostly, as you can see, are round pipes. Go ahead, Michael. And when we did the modeling for this to look at how many structures were able to pass a given storm event, you can see the results there. The 2-year storm event is the green, and the 100-year storm event is the red. And I don't have that. Put my glasses on so I can see. If I have it up in front of me, I can see it, but.
It's 1% red.
Yeah. Yeah, and then what is that, 51%? It's pretty small on my screen. But, you know, over half of the structures within this watershed failed at the 100-year storm event. You know, that's something that, and I'll get into this in a minute, that we want people to be aware of that. You know, not only, again, I sort of wear the Trout Unlimited hat, so my focus is aquatic organism passage, but the vulnerability of this from many different perspectives is huge to these communities. So go ahead, Michael. We also delivered this data, and I'll get into this in a minute, to the communities in this tabular form here. And then next slide, Michael.
Well, I saw you did the 2, 10, 25, 50, and 100 year on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So this tabular data includes whether it was functional through AOP, aquatic organism passage, geomorphically, meaning does the infrastructure meet the size of what the stream channel wants to be? And then the storm intervals. Have you guys talked about storm interval?
Yep, they're hip to that.
Okay, great. So so we've got, we basically built this for the 2, 10, 25, 50, and 100-year storm flows. That's what we modeled it on. Okay. And we also in GIS created maps. And so we were able to display the condition of that structure on maps. And again, the whole reason to build these tools was so we could go out, next, Michael, go out and work with the communities to share the kind of data that we see here. This is the Warner River watershed, and I threw this in here just so you could, or I could share that comparing watershed to watershed, we're finding almost identical conditions in every watershed that we work in. And right now I've worked in, I think, 9 different watersheds, and they're all coming in at right about that same level, that 50 to 60% failed infrastructure at the 100-year storm event. And one more. So there was another slide. Michael, go forward once.
Go one more.
Yeah, no, go back. I'm sorry. I'll get to that in a minute. I had one where I wanted to talk about community presentation. If you can go back, it's not a big deal if you can't. That's, and then forward. Yeah.
That's
so, it's, I move now into how do we figure out where we want to work, and how do we get communities involved with us to do this work. And again, at the top of the list there is AOP, and that's my target. And I'm pretty straightforward with people that I work with, that the funding that I can get, and I should have probably prefaced a lot of this with Trout Unlimited works on soft money. All the work that I do, and over the 10 years, it's probably millions of dollars, is all grant funding. I spend a lot of time out there writing grants to do this restoration work, and the pools of funding that I have access to are focused on AOP. Sometimes a community, I'll partner with somebody else that can get some financial support from other grant sources, but primarily I'm focused on organizations that'll fund habitat, connectivity and habitat restoration. So, I work with these communities, and one thing I realized early on in my career is if I restore something for flood resiliency, then I get aquatic organism passage as part of that. And the buzzword even now, 10 years later, is still flood resiliency. And so most of my time spent working with different partners and communities is focused on flood resiliency. And then again, because of that, I get what I'm looking for, which is reconnected stream channels. All right, next. Here's a bunch of metrics that, we'll look at that potentially can drive some of these projects. But the big one is habitat integrity, hydraulic capacity. A big selling point for me is emergency services. And you know, aging infrastructure and, you know, what towns, you know, what's a priority for a town and what kind of match support can they bring to a project, which when I talk to communities, I often say, I hope to get 20% from the town in either cash support or in-kind services, such as working with the DPW. Maybe the town has a gravel pit that we can access for materials and that kind of thing. So it's really putting together a package of how we can get outside money and local money to do that. Go ahead, Michael. So this was the slide. Here's our little, about 4-month-old kitten that's climbing up on top of me. So this is, there's the tail. All right, you can say hi to everybody. Oh, little black cat. But I've spent, as you can see on this slide, I don't know, I've done over 30 workshops for communities. And, you know, what I've tried to do and got a grant to do a little while back was going across the state of New Hampshire, working with communities to pull these people together, and I call them the decision makers. So, you know, targeting select people, Conservation Commission members, and any other interested participants who we could take the data that I just shared with you and print out large maps, you know, print out things that they could use to review, you know, the condition of their infrastructure. And trying to drive the point that, you know, Joel and I can't be everywhere. We work with, you know, hundreds of communities across multiple states. And so we really need the support of, you know, what I call champions in communities to help us identify projects and then move them forward to take care of these restorations. Go ahead, Michael. Another thing that it took me a little while to get to this point, but we finally did, rolling out what we call our technical assistance program. And this gives us the opportunity to give this document to communities. And if somebody has an interest, they can fill this out and then get some technical assistance from us. Go ahead, Michael. Just a quick snapshot. You know, again, if you look at this pretty immediately, you see where my target is going to be. You know, the tributary on the right with 4.5 miles is much more competitive in the grant world than the one in the middle at 1/2 mile. But that's not always the priority for the community. So the community might, you know, the 1/2 mile available there might be their worst infrastructure and the one they want to focus on. And if I can, and I can help them from a technical standpoint, I do. But the way I can bring $100,000 or $200,000 to a community is the projects that have a lot more available upstream habitat. This is a project I'm working on now. I've got a $120,000 grant into the ARM Fund in New Hampshire to do this. If you click one more time, Michael, I think the 2 red circles will appear. So the picture on the left is kind of the satellite view of West Bath Road in Bath, New Hampshire. This drains into the Ammonoosuc River, which is then into the Upper Connecticut River. But this is a great site. New Hampshire Fish and Game is really excited about it. And what we found on the upstream side of this, when we first got there, a couple cows standing in the stream, just doing their thing, drinking water and releasing water. we were like, okay, we got to do something about this. And I don't have a close-up picture, but that stream channel there is totally degraded. And upstream of this, there's some awesome cold water habitat. In fact, it's in the highest 2% for brook trout habitat in the state. So this was a perfect site. You can see that perched culvert picture in the middle. Look at the size of that scour hole. That is huge, and it's probably 6 feet deep. So the little kids that come down with their fishing poles are going to find a good pool to fish in, but the fish can't get upstream. So what we're doing in the process of doing now is we have grant funding from NRCS to restore the channel upstream on that farm. And then we're hoping, and we should hear in the next month, whether we have funding to take that undersized culvert out and put in a bridge. And the culvert, in fact, this last big storm event we had over the summer, the town was pretty concerned because the water flow now is dropping through in the middle of that pipe. It's rusted out. So it's going right through the hole in the middle of that pipe and underneath. So it's not even really coming out the pipe at the end anymore. It's undermining the structure completely.
Can you just really briefly explain the ARM fund?
Yeah, absolutely. So by the way, if anybody has any questions, we can keep this pretty informal. Just raise your hand and jump in there. But the ARM fund is the Aquatic Resource Mitigation Fund. And it was created because as contractors come in and do development, often they will impact wetlands. And when they do, they have to mitigate that wetlands impact. And often a contractor doesn't have the time or knowledge to restore an impact. So they'll just pay the penalty fee for the DES permit. And that pool of money then gets combined over the course of a year and then gets distributed via a competitive grant program to people like ourselves who go out and do the restoration work to mitigate that impact that they did. So it's a great source of funding for us. Again, we were the only project that submitted a proposal in this particular drainage area, and there was $112,000 in the program for this one. Across the state, I want to say there was like $3 or $4 million in mitigation funding. So it's pretty substantial.
It's by watershed though, right?
Yeah. Well, it's not necessarily by watershed, it's more region. So
Nine
this is,
total.
yeah, 9 total. This is the middle Connecticut, they call it.
Okay.
And again, just a quick overview of, you know, what are the drivers to make us decide where we want to work, and finding a middle ground with the town folks on, you know, they want to make sure that there's emergency access to community members where there's vulnerable infrastructure. So that plays into the role. And on that project I just showed you, that big culvert, if that ever blew out, there would be a significant number of people and houses upstream of that location that would not be able to get out of there until they fixed it. All right, go ahead, Michael.
Huh. Wonder why it froze. Hold on for a second. Froze for a second.
All right, come on.
There. Oh, we did that, right? So,
Yep, we did that one, so go the other way.
okay.
Great. Just a quick overview of our staff. Myself, Aaron Rogers, also an Antioch grad student with me while I was there. Focusing, she lives in Brattleboro, actually, And so she focuses on a lot of Western Mass and Vermont. Joel's on the call today, Jeff Tenley. So we've got 2 engineers working with us. Both these guys have over 30 years of experience with NRCS. They're both retired now and working part-time for us to do the engineering work that we need. And then a couple other people, one in Connecticut and upstate New York, and Jeff Reardon in Maine. We can fly through that one. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I don't even know where I am time-wise. Just seems like I've been talking a while.
Fine, it's almost a quarter of 3. You're fine.
Quarter to 3. Okay. Yeah. So let me go through this fast. I mean, one of the things that I really work with communities on is trying to develop these projects, as I mentioned. And part of that is developing conceptual plans. And go ahead to the next slide, Michael. And then I'm not going to spend any time on this. Go to the next one. I think that, yeah. So here's a good example of a project we did, or still doing, out on the Ipswich River, if any of you guys are familiar with that. It's North Shore, Massachusetts. And this was a project I got involved with them because of the local chapter there. And they did a culvert assessment. And, you know, I shared with them that I find if we go in and do conceptual designs on the infrastructure that we want to replace, we're way more competitive getting our grant requests than if we go in without a plan and just say, hey, we need 200,000 to do this restoration project. They want to see how we got there. So Joel has spent a lot of time in this particular watershed surveying all the data sites and collecting that data. We run basically a preliminary engineering assessment on it. And go ahead, the next slide.
Can I ask you what P mean? It's in
I'm sorry?
In the legend, it has CP and DP. Oh, dam priority. Okay, I see. Non-title. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And this is what we're after. I mean, all the work to do this, it costs us about $5,000 to do these 30% plans. And on the right-hand side, basically, is what we're after. It's a preliminary cost estimate. So if we go to a grant funder with a number, that's pretty hard. And, you know, we build in a contingency to it, 15%. Then, you know, we show them that we're well ahead of the game with trying to get this project funded and get it into restoration. So basically what we do is design a structure that's going to meet the needs of that site and come up with a project cost for it. And so far we've been doing it, I don't know, probably 6-7 years now, and it's worked great for us. This is the result of one of those that we did. You can see that scour hole and undersized pipe. And what we put in there was a precast concrete abutments with a precast bridge deck. And this particular site is a dirt road in the town of Pittsburgh, New Hampshire. And so we just covered the deck with crushed stone, crushed gravel. But we did that project, the actual construction project was done in 2 days, and it cost us $70,000. If I did this project in Massachusetts, it would have been $270,000. I mean, the difference in the requirements and the costs in the 2 states and in northern New Hampshire are just incredibly different. But anyway, we are pretty happy to get that in for $70K.
You're talking about regulatory requirements?
Yeah, that's part of it. And then prevailing wages, and then the the process to go through DOT review, Mass DOT, takes a lot of time and a lot of engineering time to do it. And that's a big driver for us if, you know, we have a lot of time spent in that engineering component.
Okay.
Finished project, you can see the different types of structures here. This is a multi-plate arch, and originally we were doing a lot of those. I prefer the box bridges now because they're way faster to put in, and their lifespan is better than these if they're maintained. So, but I threw this picture in because I just love the fact that we were able to get, I mean, what are probably 30 people there to do a great post-restoration planting, and got a lot of community members involved. A lot of the crew from Keene State College came out. We propagated a lot of the plants that we did the restoration work on the top, the roof greenhouse at Keene State. So we got a lot of students to come down and spend a fun day putting in a lot of plants. All right, next. Just a couple more slides for me. This is the BB River project just on the south side of the White Mountain National Forest. This property was bought by the Conservation Fund. And if any of you know anything about the Conservation Fund, it's, I call it a land protection organization that will find these large tracts of land, purchase them, do some restoration work on them, put a working forest easement on them, and then put them back out on the market for sale, and then do the same thing over again. So the concept is to conserve and protect these landscapes, but allow a working forest process, a sustainable working forest to continue on the property. So we got involved with this one, and our role here was to put in the 5 bridges that I'll show you in a second. Next slide. Ooh, that map didn't come out. That's kind of weird. But anyway, you can see the topo map underlay that should have come out in this. But the point I'm trying to make here is you can see the water temperatures. This is the water temperature on the main stem of the BB, all in the mid 70s, which trout aren't going to survive in that temperature. It's just way too hot. So they had nowhere to go. That's the main stem of the river. All the tributaries were barriers. Next, Michael. And you can't see the stream channels, which you should be able to see. But anyway, look at the temperature gradient. It's 10 degrees colder right at the confluence coming out of the tributaries into the main stem. So the big push was to get access to all those cold water tributaries so the fish could get out of the main stem of the river during the hot summer months. Next. And so this is one of 5 sites. This probably was the most challenging because of the slopes involved, and it doesn't look like it, but if you see the upstream side underneath that new bridge, that slope just climbed. It went fast. And so we had to really spend a lot of time working with the contractor to rebuild the stream channel and get the slopes correct so it wouldn't head cut all the way up there.
Did you create like a step pool structure?
We did. We put in basically grade controls all the way up. This is, probably within, a month after we did the restoration. So that stream channel over the past couple of years has changed, but we put in grade controls that we fully expect to hold the grade, but also to develop some step pools in the process. Again, another really big partner project. You can see the partners associated with this. Lots and lots of money, forest legacy money came into this. I think overall the total project cost here was multi-million, but it was a tremendous project that we're still working on now, but it took a lot of entities to come together to make this happen.
Who organizes the volunteers?
So the local chapter, the Pemigewasset TU chapter here, basically worked with Ben Nugent at New Hampshire Fish and Game to rally all the volunteers to come out and do the electrofishing days, and then also some of the in-stream work that we did as part of it.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. So I'll pass it over to Joel. Joel is used to me going way over time. Sorry, Joel.
No, it's fine. No, it's fine.
But Joel will fill you in on the culvert assessment stuff.
Yeah, we got
So great. So kind of rolling out of what everything Colin was just saying, I am going to be kind of following up on the culvert assessment portion first, and then secondly, I'm going to kind of, that's our, we approach these projects, like Colin said, on the landscape scale. These days, that's what we're really trying to do. Instead of having like focused small areas geographically, we want to be targeting entire watersheds. So to rehabilitate a watershed, number one, we need to reconnect these smaller tributary stream systems by fixing undersized infrastructure, all of these, like the photograph that we're looking at on the screen right now. And then the second phase would be to restore those upstream tributaries to increase the habitability for the native brook trout or any other fish species that may be present in these systems. So like I said, first I'll be talking about the culvert assessment portion, and then I'll follow up with the large wood habitat restoration portion. Next slide, please. So here in New Hampshire, we work directly with the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services to do these culvert assessments. Each state in New England, they have different assessment systems that they adhere to. For instance, in Massachusetts, they have the NAACC, the NAC protocol, which is similar to here in New Hampshire. As you can see on the screen, we have the Stream Crossing Initiative Protocol. It's the Statewide Asset Data Exchange System, abbreviated as SADS. That's where New Hampshire pretty much clearinghouse stores all of their culvert assessment data for processing and future use by state agencies, conservation commissions, and public use as well. And on the right on this slide, you can see all of the different state governmental agencies that are involved in the development of this protocol. So it's not only the Department of Environmental Services that's using this data, it's Fish and Game for the habitat purposes, Department of Transportation, as Colin said, for the purely infrastructure side of things to make sure that these roadways aren't going to be blowing out during large storm events. There's a lot of players that were involved in the development of this assessment protocol for culvert assessment. Next slide. So using this protocol to survey stream crossings here in New Hampshire, there's a lot of different variables that are addressed and a lot of parameters that are collected while in the field during these assessments. All of that data essentially is being used to boil down for 4 major categories, and I have them listed here. The first one being geomorphic compatibility. Simply, is the structure fit with the river forming process, kind of like what Colin touched on, that hourglass shape. You have these stream systems where the natural bankful width that the stream wants to be is 15, 20 feet. And then they're rolling through a pipe that's a fraction of that bankful width. And that's where you're getting a lot of this damage at these road crossings. So that's geomorphic compatibility. The other side of it is kind of what our priority focus is, the aquatic organism passage, AOP. We want to make sure that fish can actually get into these smaller headwater tributaries from the larger downstream systems. Number 3 is simply the condition. That's more of a Department of Transportation focus, but they want to know simply what shape is that crossing in? Is it a new crossing that was set within the past 5-10 years, or is it something that's been there since the 60s and 70s that's heavily degraded and far more likely to be compromised during a large flow event? And then finally, hydraulic capacity. That's pretty much your flood resiliency side of things. Can that structure properly convey the 100-year storm event? As Colin said, when we break these down, we do focus on the 2-year, 5-year, 10-year, but ultimately the real driver is that 100-year flow event. That's where we're seeing a lot of these compromised structures or on the fence structures that may be okay during smaller storm events. They're going to be, you know, ripped right out of the ground. And the photographs on this slide are an example of that. These aren't local photographs. These were taken from upstate New York, I believe upstate New York. But it doesn't matter what state in the union you're in. When a large storm event blows through town, these structures are getting pulverized, and you can see the consequences. And what's, you know, from a financial side of things, what's in the long run, what's cheaper, to replace an existing structure that's undersized with an appropriate size structure, or to wait for the day where something like in this photograph occurs, and then you need to fix it on the fly. So we're trying to make communities aware of vulnerable structures in their you know, towns and municipalities, and ultimately avoid what we see in these photographs. Next slide.
Joel, may I ask a question briefly?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, absolutely.
I just wonder about the 100-year storm event as the metric for you know, sizing and scaling these structures, and you know, in light of climate change and the increasing potential, you know, like probability. Yeah, if you could just speak to measuring the 100-year storm event and climate change, if you're looking.
No, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Like Colin kind of touched on earlier when he was speaking. Formally, whenever these structures are designed by the engineers, they're using flow regime data based on existing data that's been collected at some point in history. Formally, for a really long time, especially here in New Hampshire, but New England at large, we had been using NRCS rainfall data models, and Colin, correct me if I'm wrong on that. But a lot of that data was collected in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, which does not reflect by any stretch of the imagination, you know, the rainfall that occurs these days with changes in climate change. We currently use, I want to say it's from Cornell University. Colin, nod your head if that sounds right.
That's correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
Cornell University has much more accurate and recent rainfall data within the past, I don't know, I would say 10, 15, 20 years at the most, which is far more reflective, far more representative of, you know, rainfall that we should expect during these large storm events, you know, with changes in climate change that we've experienced recently. The 100-year storm event, specifically that flow regime, why are we choosing that as the defining feature to size these structures? Ultimately, that's going to be your, you know, you can go up and up and up, and you can do the 200, 500. It's just with frequency, more frequently. And again, going back on climate change, you know, the 100-year storm event theoretically should occur once roughly every 100 years. With climate change these days, regrettably, we're seeing a lot more frequency in what we would consider to be 100-year storm event flows. So we're using that as a target. We could, you know, anybody could use higher flow regime data to size these structures during the engineering process, but it's kind of been like a collective, you know, just statewide, nationwide. The 100-year storm event is what's been used as the defining flow regime that these structures should be sized on.
So if I can just add to, it wasn't that long ago that we were using the 50. And, you know, I think, you know, the state and the industry felt that 50 was a pretty good metric. But within, you know, that 10-year span that I've been with TU, it now, you know, we felt like when we started using the 100, you know, we were kind of on that far edge, but now it's the standard.
Yeah, it is. Even in Massachusetts, like with Ipswich, for instance, the Ipswich or watershed that Colin was talking about, all of that design, Massachusetts, they use that as a standard as well, correct?
Yeah. So, you know, there may be some states out there that are not, but I think overall people just accept that the 100-year storm event, regardless how often we get it, is the flow regime that we want to design for. That, you know, if we get a 200-year storm event, the 100-year storm, you know, that size structure is going to be able to hold and handle that. Just like, you know, maybe sometimes the sizing for a 25-year storm event, but, you know, from a economical standpoint versus, you know, emergency repair or replacement standpoint, it seems like that's the sweet spot, you know, the flow for the 100-year.
Thanks.
So this illustration here that we're currently looking at is kind of just the, you know, top-down plan view of any given road stream culvert crossing. I wanted to use this just to illustrate during our assessments using the DES protocol in New Hampshire. We're not only focusing on the structure itself, we're focusing well upstream and well downstream of that structure as well. We want to know what the natural stream system looks like on the upstream side, because ultimately that's what's going to dictate the sizing of the structure itself, going back to that geomorphic compatibility. If the bankful width of the upstream is, say, 20 feet, we're going to want the clearance of that structure to be at minimum 20 feet. We want it to be geomorphically compatible. So, and that ties directly into the hydraulic vulnerability. If it's geomorphically compatible, chances are the hydraulic vulnerability is going to be on the low end. So again, this just kind of illustrates that we're not focusing on only the structure and the roadway, but also well upstream and well downstream, the features that we're seeing in the natural stream system itself. Next slide. So going back to those parameters that I mentioned that we collect, this is just a quick snapshot of all 93 of them. I'm not going to touch on every one of them, but again, it kind of just highlights that we're focusing on, again, not only the structure itself, but the area upstream and the area downstream as well. All of that data is being used to consider those four major categories being geomorphic compatibility, AO, AOP, hydraulic vulnerability, and general condition. Next slide. So once we go out into the field, we collect all this data at these different road stream crossings. We take that data and we digitally upload it to the SAIDS database. And again, this is kind of the clearinghouse for the data that DES uses. This was developed by the T2 department. It's a technology transfer department at University of New Hampshire. They developed this database where all of the assessment data that's done for DES is uploaded. And ultimately what DES does is takes this data and processes it for the four major categories. This database is not for public use. This is for only assessors and state access. Next slide, and I'll show you where the public access comes in. So this is the DES Aquatic Restoration Mapper. They developed this for specifically the ARM program that Colin was talking about earlier. After the data is processed by DES, this is the front end that the public has access to. Basically, again, you can see on that right pane, it breaks down those four major categories, and you can review any assessed crossing that's been, data's been collected in the state. You can look at the data that was collected, the individual parameters, as well as its score given by the DES, the hydraulic modeling. So
you can also, Joe, if I can interject, you can also see the 6 pictures associated with
correct.
each of
A part of the suite of data that's collected during the assessment is photographs of the structure itself. So that's also included in this online database, again, for public use. Ultimately, this is a great tool for targeting, going all the way back to the question of how are we targeting these individual crossings within these watersheds. This is a fantastic tool to do so. This is a one-stop shop to show you the four major categories, its vulnerability, and you can also, there's other tools that you can't see here, but you can also look at cold water habitat. So going back to that landscape scale concept, you can look in areas that, overlay good cold water habitat, a lot of upstream reaches, and then undersized structures. So if we can go to any granting source or the towns to do so and say, hey, we got this small package of crossings in your municipality that are vulnerable, and not only that, but they also have really good cold water habitat upstream of them, it's a great pitch for grant sources. And like Colin said, when you're developing these grant packages with like low-end 30% engineering plans, this is the type of data that you can couple into that, and it just makes your pitch for grant funding that much more powerful and more likely to be funded. Next slide. So this is just a photograph. This is, again, going back to, I believe Colin already showed this one. This is Falls Brook in Swansea, New Hampshire, just south of Keene. This was a project that was completed using the ARM fund. On the left, this is obviously pre-restoration photographs. On the left is the upstream. You can see how backwatered, and they got a crazy cage thing in the way, so that doesn't help AOP very well. The picture on the right is beginning of the project once they started to excavate out, and it kind of just illustrates the undersized nature of these crossings, Falls Brook in particular for this example. The upstream bank full width on this crossing, I want to say, was somewhere in the neighborhood of 20-ish feet. That pipe is definitely not 20 feet wide. So there's that hourglass again, just severely undersized, preventing AOP, or creating rather, you know, unnecessary hydraulic scour downstream. Just a bad crossing all around. Next slide. And this is the after. This is the same photo that, or same crossing that Colin showed the photo of everybody standing on top of. This is looking downstream through the structure. Again, it just shows, you can see that upstream bank full width. You can kind of just, you know, using your eyeball to measure here, you can see that bank to bank, it matches the width of that arched structure. That's what we're looking to do. There's compatibility, which in turn benefits hydraulic vulnerability or hydraulic capacity for this matter. The goal is to have it not be vulnerable at all. Next slide. So moving into the wood additions, like I said, when we're looking at these landscape scale projects, two key factors: reconnection by fixing these undersized crossings to reestablish aquatic organism passage, and then rehabilitating and restoring the upstream habitat of these crossings for the local fish population. So I'm going to get into not too much detail, but I'm going to kind of just touch on the process that we use using large wood restoration. Cool.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Alex is on.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
There.
All right. So if you'd like to go to the next slide. So basically with large wood restoration, we're looking ultimately to strike on three main factors that we're looking to benefit. Number one is create in-stream habitat. Basically a lot of the rivers in New England at large, they're devoid of naturally occurring in-stream large wood. The reasons are, you know, various, but primarily timber harvesting back in the, you know, post-Civil War area during the Industrial Revolution. Throughout the White Mountains in New Hampshire here locally, is heavily harvested in all of these stream channels. A lot of them were driven to straighten them out for the sake of pushing large wood out of the mountains. So a lot of the river systems, small and large in New England and New Hampshire specifically, they don't have naturally occurring in-stream large wood, not in the quantities that we would like to see occurring naturally. So we want to create that good in-stream habitat with the large wood. We also want to re-engage surrounding floodplains. That ties a lot into the hydraulic vulnerability of these watersheds. Because they're devoid of in-stream large wood, water just kind of conveys through these systems quicker than they naturally should be. We're losing out on the benefit of the surrounding floodplains, the riparian areas on these smaller headwater tributaries. Instead, the water just is conveyed out immediately into the larger downstream systems, and that causes flood problems, as well as the loss of nutrient cycling, all the benefits that you see with retaining water in these headwater systems for longer periods of time. You're losing those benefits. And then ultimately retaining fine sediment and organic material and moving through the system. Basically, again, when these flows are unchecked by naturally occurring in-stream large wood in these headwater tributaries, they're just moving smaller material out of these systems, creating incision in these stream channels. And by incision, I mean the elevation of the stream bed relative to the banks on the sides is getting lower and lower and lower, to the point where these streams completely disconnect from their surrounding floodplains. And you know what I mean? If you're familiar with the LA River in Los Angeles, it's the giant concrete, you know, spillways used to simply convey water out of a system. Stream channels in New England, you know, are slowly becoming, they serve the same function as that when they get disconnected from their surrounding floodplains. So we're looking to retain sediment in the systems, prevent the incision of these stream channels to maintain engagement with the surrounding floodplains. Next slide.
Joe, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So would provide habitat?
I'm sorry, say that again, it broke up a little.
Does the wood itself provide habitat?
Oh, 100%. We refer to it as like three-dimensional complex in-stream structures. Basically, in-stream wood creates habitat for fish at all points of their life cycle. They prevent predation from other fish species. They prevent predation from basically refuge from, you know, ground-dwelling mammals, birds, everything. when you have a stream channel that has no structure within the stream, it's you know what I mean, essentially shooting fish in a barrel, especially during those low flow conditions where if you have a pool that's been disconnected from the active flow in a stream channel and it doesn't have any type of refuge in it, no type of cover, structure, wood within that channel, those fish, their days are numbered essentially. By putting wood in these systems, it's creating that complex habitat that prevents what's referred to as refugia from predation ultimately.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So this is kind of just a cross section of any given stream channel. I like to use it to highlight the actual area within a cross section of a stream that we focus our large wood work on. So like Colin's been touching on the term bank full width. Basically within the bank full width is where we like to put wood in the system. Ultimately, we like to focus on the hydrologic floodplain. That's basically the outer limits, the extent of where we do our woodwork when we're working on these streams. And the hydrologic floodplain is basically defined by the elevation of the 2-year storm event. There it is again. You know, we use that 2-year storm event to kind of dictate bank full elevation as well as the hydrologic floodplain. Any part of the riparian area surrounding a stream channel that's inundated during that 2-year storm event, we consider to be within the hydrologic floodplain of that cross section. Topographic floodplain, that's based off intervals, and I see Colin waving his hand.
I just caught something here that I don't think I've noticed before. I've used this graphic quite a bit as well.
Yep.
The bank full width. You know, if I was measuring the bank full width in the field, I would have measured it at that lower elevation where the water is.
Well, that's your active low flow channel, absolutely.
Yeah.
So you can have some dry within the bank full width during that. And again, that depends on system to system for sure.
Right. Yeah, but it's interesting that, you know, sort of the standard, if you will, the graphic is showing that higher elevation there.
Yeah.
Just thought I brought that out there.
And definitely, and it depends. Like on this graphic on the right hand side, you can see you don't have that expanded floodplain, but on the left side of the graphic, you do. So it definitely can vary from stream to stream, and again, a lot of that's based on the incision as well. The deeper a stream gets carved out by strong flows, the less of a hydrologic floodplain ultimately you're going to have. So we're trying to re-engage. When I say re-engaging those floodplains using this in-stream wood, that's the area that we're trying to re-engage, is that hydrologic floodplain. Next slide. So big wall of text. We don't have to go over all of it, but basically the bold face the bold print is basically the key parameters that we're taking into consideration when deciding whether or not these streams, you know, can use large wood, how it's going to be implemented, et cetera. Starting at the top, bank full width, we've already touched on that several times. That is a huge factor when it comes to how we're going to put large wood in the system. The greater the bank full width, essentially, the bigger the pieces of wood we're going to have to put in to prevent the movement of that wood during high flows. Stream slope, I would say, is the second strongest dictating factor. We like to work in areas where, let's call it approximately 5% slope or less. We like to work in anything steeper than that. Typically, we don't do this type of work. The overall sinuosity of the stream channels, how channelized are they? Are they straight? Are they unnaturally straight? Are they very sinuous and braided? A lot of that is taken into consideration. Again, when we're putting this wood in the system, it directly impacts the stability of the wood that we're putting in. Stream bed substrate. Again, we're trying to create habitat. So when we put wood in these streams, it's going to create when the wood interacts during these high flow events with the water interacts with the wood rather, it creates these hydraulics that are going to create stream bed scour, digging out pools. And again, that's going to accentuate the habitat in these streams. So we want to know how mobile that stream bed material is. Fine silt and clay, or is it cobbles and boulders? Average bank height. Again, that's kind of your incision point. How deep relative to the surrounding floodplains is the stream bed. We don't like to work, we try to work in areas where the stream banks are lower as opposed to higher, but we'll work in any bank full height where we'll take into consideration and we'll work in. But ideally, the lower the stream bank, the better the floodplain re-engagement will be. And then finally, natural in-stream wood. How much is already present? You know, first and foremost, does this, any given stream system, does it need large woodwork? Does it need to have the habitat restored, or does it look like it's in good shape on its own? Next slide.
Okay. Again, it froze. Hold on.
No, no problem.
Wrong way there.
So basically, how are we doing this work? We're low impact. You're not going to see big yellow machines, you know, backhoes or bulldozers when we're doing this work. This is all done by hand. The only powered piece of equipment is the chainsaw that I run. Everything else is hand operated, as you can see in this photograph. One of the key pieces of equipment that we use is on the bottom left in this illustration. It's called a grip hoist. It's essentially a big come along. In the picture on the right, you can see one of my field members using this piece of equipment. What it does is, after we fell a tree onto the ground, we are capable of moving entire trees that weigh a lot using this piece of equipment. Without this piece of equipment, the work that we do would be, dare I say, impossible. Without this, it would be so difficult. So the chainsaws and grip hoists are our two key pieces of equipment. The rest of it's basically powered by elbow grease. Next slide. So this is just a quick screenshot of kind of where we've been working. Ultimately, like I mentioned earlier, I've been with TU for approaching 7 years. In that amount of time, we've completed approximately 25 miles of restored streams, and that spans across New Hampshire and Vermont. The yellow dots on the two state maps kind of highlight the general areas. Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, a lot of work up there. Green Mountains of Vermont, a lot of work out there. Here in New Hampshire, southern New Hampshire, we've done a lot of work in the southern region with NRCS. Lakes region with Belknap County Conservation District, we've done a lot. And then up north in the Nulhegan watershed in Nash Stream Forest with New Hampshire Fish and Game. And this kind of, again, just touching on, ultimately, the work is done by my field team. Usually it's 6 of us, 2 sawyers, meaning chainsaw operators, and then an additional 4 field hands to operate the grip hoist equipment, as well as move smaller pieces of wood by hand. Next slide.
Yet again, hold on.
Technology. So at this point, basically, this is just pictures, a slideshow of photographs of some of the woodwork that I've done, and some good examples of the impacts that we want to see over time as this wood that we add to the stream channels develops. All the photographs you'll see on the left are taken within a day or a week or so of initially being put into the stream. All the photos on the right that you'll see will be down the road by a year, and some of them several years. So this is Northeast Kingdom. This was Stony Brook, which is in Maidstone, Vermont. Picture on the left, that was a few weeks after installation. On the right, you can see a year after the development of what that wood looks like. Again, we're trying to create these beneficial hydraulics to create scour pools, which are good habitat, especially during low flow conditions in these stream channels. And the wood itself, the structure that the wood creates within the stream channel, is going to create good habitat and refuge for the fish population. And that's going to just bolster their numbers over time. And if anybody has any questions at any point if they see something that they would like, further detail on these pictures, please just, speak up, and I'll be happy to answer those questions.
Yeah. Is there a ideal time of year to do this work or not?
No, there definitely is. Low flow, the broad answer to that is low flow conditions. And by low flow, pretty much summer season, anywhere spanning from June up until, I would say, roughly this time of year that we're in right now. Post thaw in the springtime, once those flows recede and the rains kind of go away and we move into the warmer summer months, that's where we like to begin this type of work. And then prior to the fall rains, which should be occurring really any day now, you know what I mean? Once we start to move into mid-fall, that's where we start to see the stage of the flow in these streams in New England start to go back up again, and we like to avoid that. So ultimately, low flow conditions would be the target time to be doing this type of work.
And also I'll include, Joel, October 1st is normally the cutoff date for us working in streams, sure, primarily because the brook trout are starting to move up the streams to spawn. And we want to be really careful not to be disturbing any of the reds or
Correct.
covering them more than they are just naturally. So, you know, we can get dispensation to go in and work later if we're trying to get a project done. But Fish and Game normally closes the streams off at October 1st deadline.
Yeah, and any time that we would like to do work past that deadline that Colin quoted, we you know, communicate directly with the state Fish and Game or Fish and Wildlife office, and you know, we just get clearance from them. Essentially, we ask if, you know, they believe there would be any detrimental impact if we did the work on any particular specific system, and we, you know, we kind of just fall back on their advice for that.
Okay, so to get a representation of costs, let's just, you got 6 crew. How many linear feet can a crew do in a day?
Well, in a single day, in good conditions, I can clear anywhere from, I would say, 0.15 to 0.25 at maximum miles per day. So, you know what I mean? Roughly 0.2 of a mile a day in good conditions is a target that I like to achieve.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. Next slide. Here's another example from the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. On the left is the day of installation. On the right is a year after. And you can just, again, you can see the benefits that we like to see in this photograph. You can see the hydraulic impact, the impact the wood has on the flow. It's creating that good scour on the stream bed. And again, we're looking to create deep pools where we install this wood, because during low flow conditions, it's those pools that the native fish population are used to hold out until the stage of that stream comes back up again. Without those pools, they're either going to exit the system entirely or they're going to dry out. And I'm not sure, you know, so many times during droughts, you'll walk a stream and you'll see dried up pools with dead fish in it because they had nowhere left to go. We're trying to create these deep pools to create good habitat during all times of year, but especially during the low flows. So when I see on the picture on the right, when you see that hydraulic scour that lower piece of wood is creating, that's great, because directly beneath that will be a nice deep pool. Not only that, but you can see all the wood that's kind of stacked up. That's going back to that in-stream structure, just that three-dimensionally complex in-stream habitat that we're trying to create. That's great. As well as you can see a lot of the organic matter retention. We want to catch natural material moving down these systems with the wood that we add. You know, just going back to the progression of going all the way from macroinvertebrates, the bugs that the fish eat, up to, you know, the birds and mammals that eat the fish. We want to catch as much organic matter in these structures because that's going to only promote the macroinvertebrate community. It's a food source. All of these small invertebrate insects that, you know, chew on and mince up this fine organic material, they're using it as a food source. So if we can keep a lot of that in these stream channels within these wood structures, that's going to promote the growth of the macroinvertebrate community, which in turn will promote the growth of the vertebrate community, being fish, and then moving up to mammals and birds as well.
All right, Joel, I have a question about like the overall, like looking at these two pictures is a good example of like, how do you organize the structure of, like, obviously you're cutting trees down and then laying them across the river. So like, what's your analytical approach? Obviously, like the goal is to create more space for organisms, but like, what's your thought process in that?
So my analytical approach is strictly based on the stream size. The one thing, as the guy that's out doing the work, implementing these projects, my biggest concern is wood security. I want to prevent mobility of the wood that I'm putting into these stream channels at all costs. So the methods that I use to put this wood into a stream channel is directly dictated by how I best believe it's going to stay in place during high flow events. So depending on the size of the stream, and let's go back to, again, bank full width. Depending on the bank full width of any given stream channel, that is going to directly dictate how I implement the wood itself. So for instance, in this photo that we're looking at right now, this is a larger system. This is 20 plus feet, approaching 30 feet, especially in this particular section. So my approach here in these photos is using entire trees. The more, again, not to get too in the weeds, but we refer to as simply the chop and drop method, where we're using whole trees felled from the riparian zone directly into the stream channel. And we're kind of just lattice working them, so to speak, like Lincoln log cabin building these pieces of wood in the stream channel. The larger pieces are cut last, used to ballast down smaller pieces and keep them in place. You know, ultimately, everything that we have learned and methods that we've developed over time, what's the best way to learn? Look at nature, and how does nature successfully keep wood in the stream channel on its own? We try to duplicate and reflect what we see naturally occurring in stream systems where wood is secure on its own. So we're trying to make these structures really complex. So we're felling from both sides of the stream channel. As you can see, it's not one direction that we're felling this wood. Some wood points upstream, some wood points downstream. And then we're also using innate features that are at any given site that we're putting the wood in. Are there good riparian trees that we could use to pin the wood up behind to kind of, you know, just secure it on the stream banks? Are there large boulders in the stream channel that we can use to secure the wood as well? For any given area that we're putting the wood, the features, the geomorphic, you know, features of the stream channel will drive the decisions that we make, as well as the bankful width. I hope that's a kind of a general answer to your question.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Good. So same area, Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. Picture on the left, day of. Picture on the right, year later. And again, you can see how we're on the picture on the left, we're dropping these trees directly off that stream bank, and we're trying to pin them up against healthy riparian trees. So when those high flows come, the velocities won't push those pieces of wood out of the system. We're hoping they're gonna pin up and hang up, and over time become more and more secure within the sediment. The stream bed substrate will cement them in, and organic matter and rather more larger material that washes downstream will just keep piling on top and hold these structures in place during the high flow events. As you can see, the picture on the right, one moment, Colin. The picture on the right was taken, this was around this time of year last year. And you can see the stage of the flow is a little bit higher. And, you know, if I can see wood that has successfully stayed in place and has not mobilized after one full year cycle, it's survived, you know, a couple 2-year flow events, the spring thaw, things like that, I'm pretty confident that it'll stay for the long term. Colin, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you know, that complexity here, you know, you can look at that, call it with a lay eye, and think, yeah, there's probably some fish in there, but I can tell you, if we electrofish that,
Yeah.
there's a couple hundred fish in there.
No, absolutely.
And decent size fish.
Mhm.
And it's just amazing when you go back into those pools and electrofish those to see the size of the fish that are really hunkered down in there.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It really attracts them, and it works as really good habitat.
100%.
Judd Kratzer in Vermont did a paper not too long ago about the biomass by adding wood in a stream is boosted 200%.
And I have that on that final slide, Colin. I do have that.
Awesome.
That does mention that.
It's just great. This stuff it's what we need to be getting a lot into these stream channels.
So Joel, you use your 2-year establishment of, you know, stabilized wood as an assessment of success. And then Colin just talked about electrofishing. Do you guys do before and after as far as looking at these?
It depends on the project that we do. Some we have not. It depends, you know, the reality is it boils down to funding for the project. If it's something that we can do, we absolutely want to do it, because that's how we're going to learn, and that's how we're going to show people, you know, moving forward that, you know, this work does have that positive impact. Here in New Hampshire, we do work with John McGee of New Hampshire Fish and Game, and projects that we've done in the Lakes region, in Guilford, New Hampshire, as well as in Nash. We have done electrofishing prior to implementation, and follow-up for those wood addition projects is planned as well. So the hope is, as Colin mentioned, like Judd Kratzer of Vermont Fish and Wildlife has been seeing with his large wood work, we're hoping to see that increase in overall biomass. We want to see that bump in the populations within these project reaches that we have implemented large wood restoration.
Is that,
One of the things, Michael, that McGee is touting now is you build it, they will come.
Yeah.
Because it's fairly expensive to get out there and get a crew to electrofish, especially on streams this size. And every time they've done it, they've found dramatic increase in biomass. So, you know, basically, John, is like, how often do we need to do that to prove? We already have proven that it works. So maybe in specific instances where we really need to do it for like an ARM funding or something like that, that'll drive us to do it if we can get the monitoring dollars. But in most cases, really what we get is construction dollars, not funding to monitor,
sure.
just as a sidebar.
So as New Hampshire Fish and Game release this kind of data out so people see it?
John McGee has published a paper, which I do believe reflects the data, the e-fishing data on their large wood restoration sites up in Nash Stream and the Nulhegan watershed. So I believe, and Colin, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure John has at least published one paper with that data.
Yeah, and I think you might be talking about Indian Stream.
Indian Stream, excuse me.
Yeah, Nulhegan is Judd Kratzer,
Yeah.
and he's published a bunch. But yeah, so there is some data out there, Michael. And, you know, again, if you know somebody that has some deep pockets that wants to throw some money our way, we'd love to do it because it's a fun thing to do too.
Okay.
So next slide, a couple more pictures of some wood. So this is here in southern New Hampshire. This is Deerfield. This is Griffin Brook in Deerfield, New Hampshire. This is an older project. This was kind of when I first came on back in 2014. We were doing some preliminary smaller streams for woodwork. Picture on the left, day of, picture on the right, about 4 years later. And just, you know what I mean? I'm just going to keep kind of just touching on the same points that I like to see. I like to see that hydraulic action, that the impact the wood is having on the stream flow. I want to see that scour potential. I want to develop deep pools to create habitat in these streams. I see some floodplain re-engagement in this picture. The wood has created a little bit of a backwater, pushing the water laterally back into a surrounding floodplain. That's where you're going to get that nutrient cycling benefit. For the sake of flood resiliency, you're keeping the water back up in those headwater tributaries for longer periods of time, reducing the storm surges in the larger downstream systems. You know, this photograph here is just illustrates the multiple points that we're trying to hit. And yeah, this is a great installation. Again, it's a smaller stream. So going back to your question earlier about, you know, how are we deciding on how to put the wood in? This stream's a little bit different. We're not doing the chop and drop, as we say, where we're felling entire trees into the stream channel from the riparian zone. In this particular case, we'll cut trees further out and then we'll haul them in by hand, and we'll kind of just size them to length into the stream channel and put them down as tight to the stream bed as we can put it. Again, bank full width is the strongest driving force that makes me choose, you know, the different options we have to implement this large wood.
I think this is one of the best pictures for headwater streams that I've seen, that development over 4 years. This is a fantastic example of what we're looking to create in this system. Joel, you deserve a raise. 4 years later.
Tell the right people.
But, you know, if we can do this type of habitat work every 50, 100 feet through these channels that we're working, that's just fantastic. I mean, you look at the before and after, you see that left photograph, like, you know, again, the water isn't up like it is on the right side, but you can tell that, you know, that there's not a lot of structure in that before that wood got dropped in. And then all of a sudden you have these hydraulics forming these pools and cover. And yeah, it just, you know, this, I tout this is a really excellent example of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, let me just jump in. from a previous discussion in the course. If you see how the water is moving laterally up into the soil, and actually it's through capillary action, it's going in much further than what you're seeing, that's saturating the water soil column, and then it aerates. Remember what we said about cycling nitrogen, that it's the fluctuation between aerobic and anaerobic. This is what's doing that as far as getting the nitrogen cycle moving in these systems. So, okay, side.
And we can, Michael, we see a difference. I don't know if everyone knows the term hyporheic flow, but once that water moves out laterally and it's absorbed through the ground and comes back into the water column, it's at least 10 degrees colder. So you can, hit these deeper pools in these stream channels where it could be low 50s water temperature, and the water temperature up above is in the 60s.
Yeah.
So that's a huge input opportunity for us for these cold water streams to maintain that hyporheic flow.
Mm-hmm. Earth ball temperature. Yep.
Next slide. I think I have one more example. I believe it's one more. This is on that same system in Deerfield, New Hampshire. And again, all the same points that I've been making. I like to see that hydraulic action. I like to see that wood submerged for in-stream structure for habitat. I like to see that floodplain re-engagement, slowing that water down, benefits flood resiliency, benefits the nutrient cycle, benefits the temperatures, like the water temperatures, ultimately, like Colin mentioned. Just a really good example of what we're looking to create with large wooded structures that we're putting down on the ground.
Joel, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
What's the field assessment procedure for determining if enough large woody debris is in the stream?
So that's a very good question. You know what I mean? Going back, how much wood is enough wood? We default to the U.S. Forest Service has been doing a lot of research into this. And they have their own practice and protocols when they do large wood implementation nationwide. And in general, any given stream system, we'd like to see anywhere from per mile, 170 to 230 pieces of large wood. So to boil that down to a more chewable figure, every 100 feet, if I see 4 pieces of large wood, or I'm implementing approximately 4 pieces of large wood every 100 feet, that's putting me at about roughly 200 a mile, and puts me right in the window of where, based on research, that's the target quantity of wood that we like to see in these systems. So when I'm doing this woodwork, I kind of frame it in my mind as I'm moving every 100 feet down the stream channel. And within that every 100-foot step I'm taking, I want to get around 4 pieces of large wood down in the water.
I think this picture that's up on the screen is really showing what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, and the great thing about this photograph is this is naturally occurring. This is the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. This is a spruce stand that is heavily forested. It's on a private tract of land. And those are all firs or spruce that you see down in the ground. And in a natural system that's undisturbed by us, anthropogenic, forces, this is what a stream channel looks like. When I'm with Colin and we're doing these workshops, to any given agency or municipality, the one thing I always like to say is people's minds these days have been kind of polluted by that refrigerator calendar that you have at home of, the picturesque streams in New England, and they're nice and straight and the banks are tall and there isn't a piece of wood. The reality is that is not what you see in a natural setting, in these undisturbed, pristine systems. So to normalize, to try to reacclimate people into the idea of, these stream systems kind of look different than what you're used to seeing advertised. This photograph is a really good representation of that. Over time, the wood that we're putting in these systems will develop like the pictures I showed you. And they actually look, in my opinion, just as picturesque as, a system completely devoid of wood. So yeah, again, this is Maidstone, Vermont. This is Fitch Brook, if anybody's curious, this particular stream channel.
Okay.
And by the way, this final slide has those quick little hard and fast bullets of some, local research that's been done. Again, the first bullet being, the average volume of wood increases with the age of the riparian tree stand. I don't think that's really a surprise to anybody. The older the trees are around any given stream, the more likely they are going to be to fall in and contribute to that in-stream wood. Colin mentioned earlier the retention of phosphorus in the stream systems. The more wood we have in these streams, we're seeing increased amounts of retention of that phosphorus as opposed to washing downstream before that nutrient cycle can take place. Brook trout biomass, that's going back to what Judd Kratzer's done up in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont that Colin was touching on. We're seeing, an overall increase in biomass wherever wood is naturally present or implemented by us. And those numbers, we've seen an approximate 200% increase in that biomass in areas that have been treated with wood. And one thing that Judd, I'll put my feet in Judd's boots for a moment. He likes to really follow that statement with, he has control reaches and he has treatment reaches. So one big concern that he's had based on that research was, well, are the fish populations all just gravitating toward the wood addition areas and vacating the vacant areas? The answer to that is no. Biomass and control reaches has stayed static for the most part. Yet while, simultaneously you're seeing that increase, that 100%, 200% increase in biomass in the treated reaches. So when we're seeing that increase in biomass in treated reaches, it's not simply a matter of migration. It's not an exodus of fish moving to the more habitable areas. We're seeing a genuine increase in populations within those treated reaches in the Northeast Kingdom. So, that's a great sign. It's good stuff.
Okay. So I'm going to stop the share and open it up to a few questions. I know these guys spend time with us and his money, so. So
Dave, go ahead.
Dave.
Hi, thank you guys for the presentations. That was excellent. And I'm particularly interested in the wood putting the wood in the water. And I'm wondering if there's any outreach potential or efforts to educate landowners, because quite honestly, I suspect there's a lot of people that see wood fall in the brook on their property and they pull it out thinking it's a problem.
It is.
And is there any pamphlets that we can pass out or anything like that? How do we get the word out?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go first. I'll let Joel follow up. But one thing we're trying to do, especially in New Hampshire, is work with the conservation districts. And we've been working the last, 5 years now, Joel, with Belknap County Conservation District, and have done a lot of projects with them. We ended up just doing a tour a week ago with the new state conservationist from NRCS. The New Hampshire Fish and Game Department just hired a new executive director. He was present, couple staffers from Pappas's office and Shaheen's office. So we try to get out there, the word, if you will, on this stuff. And once we get people in the field and can spend some time talking to them, they get it. I kind of go back to, we want to do outreach. We want to be a voice to be heard. But again, both of us already work 70 hours a week. And our goal now, or our hope, is to have other voices singing the praise of this practice. And to do that for us, it's to get to those right people, like the conservation districts and that kind of thing. It's a really good point. There is some really good documentation of the work. We do final reports on most of the projects that we do, which, we can always send people those before and after kind of things. But I mean, it's a really good point. How do we spread the word that people have been taking wood out of streams for years and thinking that was creating problems with infrastructure? And it can, at times, if it was improperly installed, or if we just get flows that just rip the hell out of something that we put in. But it's a good point. Joel, I'll let you kind of share your feelings on that as well.
No, I basically agree with, most of the outlets that you mentioned. Local conservation districts are a powerful mechanism to advertise this work. One thing that I like to do, part of the process when we're doing these projects is, first and foremost, you need to get a permit from Department of Environmental Services to implement this work. So when we're going through the permitting process, I really like to engage with whatever given town I'm working in. I like to engage with their local conservation commission to kind of just advertise the work that we're doing and make them aware of it. So that's a kind of boots on ground outreach that we like to do. The workshops that we do, we always, for like Colin was mentioning, for undersized culverts and infrastructure, we always like to try to tie in the habitat rehabilitation side of it as well. Yeah, NRCS, that Colin mentioned them, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, they're trying to implement on their conservation easements, large wood in-stream habitat restoration as well. So they've been doing a lot of work with that. They're the agency that actually most recently developed the protocol for implementing these projects in the streams. So they're really trying hard to advertise this type of work to private landowners as well. So you have ourselves, local agencies, conservation districts and state agencies. We're all trying to, sing the good word of this type of work. Yeah, it's just a matter of exposure. And then on the national level, for us, for TU at least, we do have some social media outreach programs, via Instagram, Twitter, things like that, that we try to advertise these projects that we're doing on a national level to, again, just acclimate people to this type of work and let them know what the benefits are.
So do you get any pushback? Because I know you're dealing mostly with NRCS, USDA, Forest Service.
Yeah.
Any pushback from something like the Army Corps of Engineers who do not want to see increase in roughness coefficients on streams, which creates higher floodways?
Yeah, we actually, a part of the permitting process, we're not only required to get a wetlands permit through DES, but we're also required to get a state general permit for in-stream work through the Army Corps of Engineers. So we're communicating directly with them during the permitting process, and they're relatively on board with this type of work. We don't really get a lot of, if anything, it's the opposite. We're not getting much pushback at all. They view it through the lens of stream rehabilitation and restoration and enhancement. So as far as, specifically speaking about in-stream large wood projects, they sign off on them as just as well as DES. So we haven't gotten too much negative pushback from them. Colin, what are your thoughts?
I think we've been in the field once with one of the Army Corps permitters. Maybe Joel, you've been out yourself with one, but you and I both together once. And,
that was in Barrington, yeah.
Yeah, and it was great experience. I mean, I think he wasn't that familiar with it, but
Yeah.
once we got out there and, it was kind of a funky project that we showed him, but it was because it was a designated river, he wanted to take a look at it. And
it was a designated prime wetland.
Prime wetland. And he was really receptive to it. So I think, again, it's difficult for us to spend a ton of time on outreach, but if we can get some of those permitting agents out there to look at some of this stuff with us, and we sort of share how we put it in and why we put it in, I think they get it. And we've been in the field a lot with DES permitting agents and all of them, and included with Mary Ann Tilton. I think we were on a call with them the other day. They get it, and we're trying to create a permit by notice program now, so we don't have to go through the extensive permitting process to get permits to do this work. And I think they'll work with us to do that. But it again is, is growing, but it's still a cell because people are just very concerned with, you know, a lot of trees coming down through the system in a big water event, backing up culverts and creating havoc.
Right.
And so are we.
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, Jack.
I was gonna ask, how do invasive plants like knotweed or yellow flag iris, do they play a role in kind of project design, or are they just kind of not that important for project design? Yeah, if you could speak to that, that'd be great.
For culvert replacements, there's a fair amount of emphasis on the presence of invasive species, you know, buckthorn, knotweed, things like that. We like to remove during the replanting, the post-implementation, and Colin, jump in if anything sounds wrong, but you know, after putting in a new crossing structure, a lot of the replanting effort that's conducted, it also has to do with invasive removal as well. So for those projects, for in a local, you know, one single specific area like a culvert replacement project, invasives are taken into account. But when we're doing large woodwork, invasives not so much. We're covering miles of a river, so you know we'll document, we'll note, you know, the presence of invasives in any given area. We like to know where they are, just because it's good data to have. But less with the woodwork, more with the culvert replacements.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, you mentioned some kind of electrofishing measurement tool. I just kind of want to know more about it. Like, what is it? How do you use it? And that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, e-fishing. It's basically, it's you've seen Ghostbusters, you look like a Ghostbuster when you're out there. It's just this big pack you put on your back, and you have this wand that you just hold in the water with a switch on it, and it basically shoots out a low voltage signal to stun the fish. And kind of what happens is you put it in the water, turn it on, and the fish get, you know, stunned by the electricity, not killed, just stunned, and they float belly up to the top. You scoop them up, you measure them, you weigh them, you throw them back in. That's essentially the quick and dirty way that the e-fishing unit's used. It's a cool device. You got to have one person on the unit, and then you have 2 or 3 people immediately downstream of the operator with nets, and you're fishing out these fish as they float belly up, you know, past you, and you throw them in a bucket, and you just data log, you know, again, species, size, and weight, and yeah, makes for an interesting day in the water.
Okay.
We also have, at times, we'll use that tool to go in and collect certain size fish that we can then surgically insert tracking devices into them. And that way we're able to monitor their movement, and we can track, you know, if they're moving in and out of different stream channels through the main stem. It's pretty cool research work, and there's a bunch of people up at Plymouth State that are working on the Beebe River, doing that, coming up with some, you know, we just reconnected those 5 tributaries, and so they're monitoring the fish moving in and out of that, and they're seeing, you know, dramatic increase in upstream mobility and outstream.
Great. One more. I'll take one more question and then let these guys go.
I have one.
Okay.
So Colin, I know you were speaking before as to how expensive it is to basically like do restoration projects in Massachusetts. And I was wondering if there was like a specific state in New England that you guys work in that is the most difficult to begin the process of a project. And if you'd like to speak more about that.
Massachusetts.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's just a lot of regulations. I'm not saying they're bad, you know, they're in place for a reason, but there's a lot of hurdles to have to go through to get work done in Massachusetts. And because of that, then the overall expense is greater. And, you know, I think over time that may evolve. I mean, there's a great DEP, you know, Department of Environmental Services down there. And, you know, we've worked with them a lot, and great people that really are concerned with the environment, and we appreciate that. And I think in some respects it's over-regulated for a reason. And, you know, they have those protections in place because they've been abused. And I think that scares regulators and forces them to, you know, diversify their requirements. So I think the reality is we have to learn to work within those regulations.